I don't know if I can handle another one of these. A phone call. Yes? What's the matter? Oh, yeah. How much can we take? Well, we can take, obviously, a lot more than what we think we can. There's always a reserve that God is so gracious to give us. But how much reserve does Paul have here? I don't know. But one thing happens here that is quite remarkable. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it happened for all of us? When we had made the comment down in verse 21 that they were setting sail and everyone thought that they were going to be lost in verse 20. And they start throwing everything over. 22, Paul says, I urge you to take heart. There will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. He's telling the men, as he has so far been right on everything he has said, and now they're taking care to listen to him. They're giving him some serious attention. And even Paul likely would have been one of those who thought, none of us are going to make it. That was the moment where the Lord appeared to Paul and says, no, you're going to make it. Matter of fact, everyone is going to make it. It's going to be hard, but you're going to make it. Stay with the ship, and there will be no loss of life. So when Paul says that, they rally around him, and in a few verses we'll see what their reaction is. It said, verse 27, when the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea. You remember from the picture that we had here that they had left Fair Havens hoping to make it to Phoenix, the other end of the island of Crete. But the southerly winds pushed them out, and they're out in the open sea, and they have no control. They're starting to dump everything overboard. They've dumped the tackle overboard, and now they're just drifting and hoping that they can find some safe land. And so verse 27, it's been 2 weeks. They're hoping that maybe we're getting close to land. Verse 28, they took a sounding. Of course, that's when they drop that rope or string or line with weight to measure the depth of the water. They took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. Some of your Bibles will have a footnote of fathom being 6 feet. The first one would have been about 120 feet. Second one about 90 feet. So it's getting shallower, which of course tells you we're getting closer to land. And then their worry is that they would run aground. Verse 29, fearing that they might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern for the day to come. So in the back, they dropped 4 anchors. And it says for the day to come, they're still in the dark. You remember earlier the comment had been made, 14 days they never saw the sun or the moon. They didn't know if it was day or night. That is an intense and an all-encompassing, overwhelming storm that they just don't know anything. They barely know up from down because they're being tossed around so violently. And you can just take so much of that. And so when they think they're getting close, they decide to drop these anchors because they might run aground on the rocks. And they let those 4 anchors down and prayed for day to come. Verse 30, and as sailors were seeking to escape the ship and had lowered the ship's boat, each of those large ships, you've seen them where they have little lifeboats of some kind, they dropped that over the side into the sea under the pretense of laying out anchors from the bow. Well, these cowardly men, they're getting out of here. They're scuttling the ship. We're out of here. We're not going to stick around for this because it is so violent. And Paul said to the centurion in verse 31, and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. What do you suppose happened immediately after that statement? The centurion, who has been listening to Paul now, who knows now Paul is the man who has the word from God, and Paul says, if these guys leave the ship, no one's going to be saved. Attention. He immediately recalls these men back. No, you're not going to run away for this. And so verse 32, the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat, let it go. There's our last hope, fellas. The little life ship, life raft, whatever it was cut loose, let it go. And as the day was starting to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food. Now, they haven't eaten for 14 days. Most of them couldn't eat because of the violence of the sea. And he urged them to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. What do you suppose their reaction would have been to see a scene like that? This man who's been right about everything, who says, the Lord's appeared to me and told me that we're going to make it, but we have to stay here with this ship. And now we have a little bit further to go. We need to be strong now. We need our strength. Let's eat. And he starts eating. And when he gives thanks to God for that food, no doubt there were at least some. Maybe even today, reading this, would think, I'm not sure what we're going to be thanking God for. This storm has really messed us up. He hasn't given us a break for any of this, as if this was God's fault. Remember what Solomon said, time and chance happen to them all. Paul told them, this is not the time of year to go out into a storm and start sailing. Had they stayed in Fair Havens, they wouldn't have experienced any of this. But now they're out here, and they have been dealing with this, and where they are now is they're in that stretch between Fair Havens and what would become known, they would discover the Island of Malta. And he says, it's time to take some food. Let's eat. And the reaction that I think is so interesting about this, verse 36, then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. Every group, large or small, that is faced with a challenge of survival or crisis. Maybe they've been lost. Maybe they've been abandoned. Maybe something has happened through an accident that all of a sudden they find themselves with no help other than just among themselves. And now they have got to find a way to get out of this mess, whether it's out on an ocean or up on a mountain or out in a desert. This group has got to pull themselves together. We've all seen movies and stories about that dynamic. What has to happen is that somebody has to step forward who can give the encouragement and leadership and the confidence that the people need to survive. Because many people on their own will say, I can't do it. I'm not going to make it. Well, I just can't do it. And someone has to say, you can make it. Now watch me. Follow me. We're going to get out of this. And the people who are the most vulnerable and the weakest, they desperately need a leader. And this is why I said at the end of our class Wednesday night, isn't it interesting, during this 2 or 3 week stretch of time, Paul goes from prisoner to leader. A man who was taken on board as a common prisoner, but now as they're out here in the open sea and ready to run aground in Malta, they have seen and they have witnessed what he has said and done, and that his words were true, yet he is not an arrogant or a tyrannical personality. He is one who's saying, men, listen, and we'll get through this. Follow me. And so when they see him sit down and eat a meal in this storm and give thanks to God for it, that's a seminal moment in their lives. And without going off onto another sermon, but boy, there is a powerful sermon here about Julius, the centurion, who got on the ship at Caesarea. If he was in fact the centurion that stayed with Paul this whole time, by the time he delivers Paul to the Roman leaders in Rome, he has gone through a life change in just a few weeks. This is a voyage of a lifetime for him, where he has had some extraordinary moments to make him change his perspective of life. What a great lesson that would be, and that we would all want to be a part of that. To spend 3 weeks, to spend a month with someone. Maybe some of us have had that opportunity. I don't know, with someone who is so extraordinary in their perspective, in their abilities, in their foresight. And then having spent a few weeks with them, that rubs off on you. And you yes, I can see this works. This is good. This is positive. Rather than spend days with some friends we have that just put us down and put us down and put us, and everything's falling apart. The world is ending. But no, we don't need that. And our brethren here in America, and our brethren right now in Ukraine and Russia particularly, as I have written them the last few days, do not let your children see you live in fear. This is not what they need to see. You need to live in faith and hope for Christ, because this is where our hope is. This is where our true life is. If everything is gone, and you can just read the passages. There's multiple passages in the New Testament that deal with that principle, and that's what we keep first and foremost. And Paul was the man here in this group that did this. And so this centurion, I would have to think that long after this event had happened, many years later, however long he was able to live, he would sit back and look on that period of his time as being one of, if not the most extraordinary blessings in his life. Yeah, Ed?
This is also an example of how we can affect the non-Christian world, the people around us. Because he behaves in a way that's, so far, he's not been real preachy to them about anything. He just told them what he saw and been honest about it. And then gradually, God has put him in this position. And so that not only the centurion, but there was a whole bunch of people. I think he said maybe 270 people on that boat. Every one of those was a ripple from this rock. That as they went into their life, they recognized what God had done after this is all over.
Right.
But right now, he's leading non-Christians. These are not Christians who, because he's Paul, the apostle, they're going to do what he said. These are just folks who are paying attention. And his faith in God is demonstrated by what he did and the calmness with which he did it.
It is making my point. That you're making my point. Doesn't matter Christian or not Christian. Here's where a person comes to the forefront, and he can now have an effect for good and righteousness to all the people, believers or non-believers. I sat there the other night as I was reading this, wondering, I wonder at the end of this, of those 276 people, how many of them were not believers? You don't know, but this is a transforming moment in many of these people's lives. And Paul is taking the forefront. And he gives thanks for this food, and they follow him. And verse 36, then they were all encouraged. There's the objective. They were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were all in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. They are encouraged, and they are committed and positive now that these things that formerly were valuable mean nothing to us now. These things that were a commodity of value, we throw these things away because our objective is singular, to get off this reef and get to the island. And I'll just go ahead here a little bit. If you went to Malta today, this is what you would find. There's this rock or reef that is sticking out right off the edge of the island of Malta. And you may not be able to see it in this picture right here, but this is called St. Paul's Island. And right there is a statue of Paul. And I'll give you a little closer look at it here, that this is what is thought to be the reefs that they hit that we're talking about right now here. That they made it up to this little reef/island, and then they were able to swim over to Malta. And that's why they have put his statue right up there and called this St. Paul's Island. That's the tradition. Whether that was the exact spot or not, I don't know. But if you went there, that's what you would see today, where Paul has commenced this extraordinary event. And verse 39, it says, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach. Now that would be looking over here, this last picture that I showed you, they're looking over on the other side. The beach is over there, not far away at all. And so they thought, all right, we can make this. They planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors, left them in the sea, and the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders, then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. This is their last run. You throw the anchors away because we're not going to use this ship anymore. This is just our last step to run us aground to get us home. Get us home. And so, it says they made for the beach, verse 41, but striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, but the stern was being broken up by the surf. This is a bad situation. Both wind, wave, and rocks now are tearing this boat from the back end up to the front. And the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. Very reminiscent of Paul went through this in Philippi. When Paul and Silas are in jail, the jailer thinks they've escaped. He's going to kill himself. That law is still in force. And so they're thinking, well, we're not going to be killed. They're going to be killed. We're not going to die for this. Now, how quickly they changed from what Paul had said, I'm not sure. Maybe they weren't fully convinced in the beginning or not. But it didn't matter about them. What mattered was the head man, the centurion, verse 43, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. No doubt at this point in their relationship, that is just a little over a month old, this centurion, if in fact it is the same Julius from where they embarked at Caesarea, has now a deepening respect and regard for Paul. And he sees this man not only as a man of God, but as a man of salvation. And that's what we want to connect anyway. God that's just a God of power is an impotent, useless, futile God in the pagan world. But a God of life, of eternal life, the power of salvation, that's the God we want to know. That's why Paul would preach about the unknown God on Mars Hill. All these other gods, they live in houses made of stone. No. The God that can save you is the God whose name you don't know yet, but I'm going to tell you his name. And this is the God, of course, that Paul has been worshiping. And I can't help but think the centurion here now recognizes this is a God that I cannot ignore. Thinking of a world that they live in where there are thousands of gods, we may miss a few. If you have 1,000 grandchildren, would you be sure that every year each one of them would get their own birthday card? I guarantee you it wouldn't happen. I guarantee you. It's easy to miss. It's easy to miss. Okay, we'll stop right there. But here all these gods. Centurion now realizes, no, this is the God that we have to pay attention to. This is the God that has saved us, and Paul has said will save us, and we can't lose Paul over this. So this harebrained scheme that my soldiers have to just kill these men and say, well, they were trying to escape. No, we're not going to do that. Remember what Paul had told the centurion just a little bit earlier? Unless everyone stays with the ship, you're not going to make it. So he has an added incentive. We're all in this together, fellas. We're going to stay together. So the centurion stops that plan, hoping to save Paul. He ordered that those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and the rest on planks or pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. So somehow, some way, in this place here, in this gap between the reef where they were and the island where they were wanting to get to, they all made it. Some could swim. It wasn't that far. And men of old who were of the sea certainly could swim. And maybe the prisoners, passengers, they weren't able to, but there were plenty of pieces of boat, planks and wood that they could use as a temporary raft. and they would make it over. And the centurion took charge to make sure everybody's going to make it. Isn't that interesting? God makes the affirmation, everyone's going to make it. And it is a Roman centurion who steps forward and says, I'm going to make sure everyone's going to make it. He uses a Roman as the instrument of his promise. Boy, that's a great thought there. So they made it safely to land. And verse 1 of chapter 28, after they were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness. Now, they had seen boats coming through. And even today, when cruise ships come into an island, everybody gets excited. All the shopkeepers come out and they're selling their wares to everyone. And it's a boom to the economy. We all know that, how that works. This is something I think that's on a little different level. They showed unusual kindness. These people who had just been shipwrecked, they weren't anxious to go buy a necklace. They were anxious to get rest and food and to revive their life that had been hanging by a thread for 2 weeks. The native people showed unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all because it had begun to rain and was cold. That's their welcoming. We're going to attend to your physical needs, your immediate physical needs. You need food, you need warmth, you need to be dry. They're preparing all of these things for these people so that they can survive. They recognize the great horror and the difficulty that they had just gone through. And so when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. And when the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt, this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live. Now, what kind of viper this was, I'm not sure, but clearly from the context, they knew it would be a deadly viper, poisonous, and would be quick acting. And Paul doesn't even seem to really notice. It's like you got a splinter and you just pull it out and throw it away and he goes on. He just throws it off and he continues to work. The people are just astounded and they're standing there watching him and think, oh yeah, this was a ship that though it was from Alexandria and it had grain, very often prisoners, because when we see the centurion and the soldiers on board, centurions didn't go on ships to guard wheat. Centurions went on ships to guard prisoners. And they see these men and they are chained. And they thought, okay, well, justice was served. They tried to escape, thought maybe they could jump off the ship. And they thought, well, this guy got his comeuppance. Yeah, that's right. No doubt. Verse 5, he, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead. But when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Isn't that another interesting thing? You go from one extreme to the other. He's a criminal who deserves death, and now he's going to receive this death. And after a few minutes, no, he's not a criminal. He is a god. And they're going to worship him. This reminiscent of something else. Back in chapter 14, when Paul and Barnabas on their first journey in Lystra, when they had healed a man, it's around verse 11, they called Barnabas and Paul gods. Jupiter and Hermes, because they could heal this lame man. And of course, Paul and Barnabas, they just got angry. No, we're not gods. But what you talk about an emotional whipsaw. Through these years of Paul's life, he will hit the needle from one side to the other. Either he is the lowest form of life, that death is too good for him, or the needle will go to the other side, that he is a god and he is too good for this life. And we all must worship him, and everything in between. Now that would wreak havoc with most people who were not emotionally stable. We have heard ad nauseum for generations now, people who suddenly became famous beyond their abilities. But the fame went to their heads and they couldn't cope with it. They began to think of themselves greater than they were, and they would self-destruct. And it's just an old story going on and on. How could Paul, coming from where he did, go to such a point of fame and then back again, and then back and forth and back? How could he keep any sane mind, emotional stability? This speaks something that is quite extraordinary to the character of Paul's, not only his mentality, but his integrity and his emotional stability. Yes, Brent?
You know, one thing that's interesting is that these hardships that happen oftentimes in stories about Christians and followers of Christ is that it is a demonstration of faith as they push them through the event. And it's that demonstration of faith that others see that causes them to be drawn to Christ.
Right.
And this is, I'm sure this journey was not forgotten anytime soon. These 276 people thought for sure they were all dead. And they had given up basically hope. And, you know, when the crew starts throwing over the tackle and, you know, getting rid of the things that they need to take care of the ship, and they can't even guide the ship correctly anymore, you got to know the ocean. It's like, okay, we're done. But they were done, and they realized it was because God was looking upon Paul's favor. And this news had to continue to drop out to the Gentiles of these things that happened. And one of the reasons that Paul had this amazing notoriety with some folks, I mean, some folks just wanted to reject the notion of God and the power of people's lives, just completely reject it. And so it's very interesting. And today we look at Ukraine. We don't know all the things that are going on, but we do know some good people are suffering. And these people's lives never, has there ever been a time that God is more important to them than it is right now. And it's their faith that will see them through no matter what happens in their physical life. It will keep their mental sanity in the situation.
Now, I'm going to try my best to summarize that, and then I'm going to tell you why I won't do a good job and what I'm going to do about that. Brent is making the point that it is when Paul is under distress that people of faith, others, the pagans, can see God in them because their faithfulness to God, the things that they do and say under these terrible situations and duress, and that they themselves now take a look at God, and this may be where they can show God to their neighbor, not in times of peace, but in times of great stress and duress. And even today we're seeing in current events the people who no doubt are showing us. That is a great sermon, and Brent, you need to preach that. Because you thought of that, and if and when an opportunity ever comes up, you need to preach that sermon, Brent. Because you've got the thought, and you've got it right, and that is a most pertinent and relevant topic to discuss about when our faith shines the most. It has been true since the beginning, and it is true to this very hour. And we teach our little children in the Bible class, what do we do with our light? We put it under a bushel? No, we let it shine. And it shines when it's darkest. When the world is darkest is when the light shines the brightest. And I won't take any more of your thunder, Brent, but that's a sermon that needs to be preached. Good thought. Anyone else want to preach a sermon? We'll give you plenty of material to do that. All right, that's what's happening here now. So as normal, God's way, it seems, why would you put us through this, Lord? Well, many people are beginning to recognize and see the truth and learning about the gospel. And so back in chapter 14 and 11, they were called gods then. This is nothing new to Paul here, now on the Island of Malta. Now verse 7 says, now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. Well, this is a new event. This is, wow, we want to hear about this. When you're stuck on an island, there's not a lot of new news. And now a boat, a ship, a prisoner ship runs aground, and these people come out of here, and there's some guy that just gets bit by a snake, and he just shakes it off. I thought, we got to know who this guy is. So Publius, the chief man of the island, received him to them for 3 days. And it happened, verse 8, that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery. And Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. When they got there, it was total despair. We're losing everything. And after a few days of being there, having the opportunity to preach the gospel, to show the power of God in a way that they never expected or wouldn't have even thought of, now they are set sail on a new ship, and it's loaded down with whatever they want. I'm thinking here Paul is going, well, here it goes again. Just a few weeks ago, I thought, I know the Lord promised me to get to Rome. I don't know if I'm going to make it. Now in just a few days, well, we're all loaded up again, and we're really close to the Straits of Messina, which is the tiptoe of Italy, of the boot of Italy. We're about to roll right through there. And so he's thinking, okay, this is going to happen. Not that we doubted the Lord. And here's another 15-second sermon. Don't feel bad if you ever feel guilty because you have entertained a doubt of the Lord. Most of our doubts of the Lord as children of God, and especially those of us who have been faithful disciples for many years, the doubt comes to our mind when we don't see the means, the how. I'm not sure how. I thought it would go this way, and it didn't. And there was a dead end. The doubt is not that God won't do it. It's just we don't know how He's going to do it. And when the Lord doesn't do something the way we think it should have been done to resolve our problem or our family member's problem or someone else's problem, we're not doubting the power, the strength, the love, or the mercy of God. We have to be reminded we're doubting our own wisdom. We thought this was going to be the best way. No doubt Paul was thinking, well, to get to Rome, let's get on one good ship and let's just make the sail and get there. But Paul goes way around the way to get there and meets a number of different people and has a series of challenges with each one of them bringing people to the Lord. And I have to think that once he was finally safe in Rome and writing his letters, he's thinking, God's ways are not our ways. He didn't write Isaiah, but he sure read it and remembered what God was saying. Any question or thought or comment about that? All right, a couple more verses, and then we'll have to end here. So they put on board everything that they needed, and after 3 months we set sail in a ship that had wintered in the island, a ship of Alexandria. You remember we had mentioned before that there were ships that would run north-south, Rome to Alexander. Ships that were harbored in Alexandria from Alexandria that would go north to Rome and vice versa. So there was a constant north-south flow of ships going back and forth, exchanging cargo, goods, commodities, etc. And they happened to find one of these ships that is from Alexandria, and they'll catch a southerly wind, which means they'll get a tailwind. They're going to go straight up the coast of Italy, which is going to be a great sailing here. And this particular ship was named Collis and Pollux, the twins of the world of the sea, the two sons, whoever they were, however they were. One writer wrote this. I wonder what it was like to preach the gospel on a ship when there are two giant statues of pagan gods of Greek mythology there, and how would you handle that? Okay, let's see if these guys go. Stop here for a moment. Here's Kinney's wisdom, which is way off base. Maybe that should have been the ship that busted up. And just a regular ship make it through. I don't know. That's just... erase that from your memory. Okay. So they get on this ship, and they put in at Syracuse. And here is where they are at. And Syracuse is down here at the bottom of Sicily. We all have heard of this island here. And this is wouldn't have looked like that then, of course. But they're able to put in at Syracuse, and they're able to stay there for 3 days. So some have suggested Syracuse was a scheduled stop. There was food to give off and cargo to pick up. I'm not sure if it'd be anywhere to leave off cargo because they just dumped everything. But that was the last ship. Oh, this is a new ship. This ship already has cargo. So it very likely as they got on this ship that already had a scheduled stop, pardon me, here in Syracuse. So they stopped there for 3 days. And from there, they made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. This is at the Messina Strait. What that means is that they made a circuit is not that they went around the island of Sicily. It doesn't mean that. What it means is they couldn't take a straight shot. And those who sail know that to get to some places against wind, you tack. And that's what that meant. They went this way, then they went this way. You tack back and forth. Turn your sails so that you can get the wind to help you. And that's how you sail forward into a headwind. And that's why it took them so long to get to this place where they were. And from there, verse 13, we made a circuit, arrived at Rhegium, and after 1 day, a south wind sprang up. And on the second day, we came to Puteoli. There we found neighbors, brothers. That's just south of Naples, modern day. And we're invited to stay with them for 7 days, and so we came to Rome. Now, we're going to end right there because here is where they're not in Rome proper yet. But there are brethren there that have been anticipating his arrival, and they go there and they meet them. And that is quite common. That's quite common in third world countries to this day. When travel is not always certain, and when people of the Lord are planning to come to a place, it is quite common that many of a village or villages will get together and go out for several days to meet them, because they don't want to wait on them. It's as if your child that has been gone to school for several years, you haven't seen them, or some scenario like this, and said, well, I think I'll roll in to Sacramento somewhere around 1 o'clock, like that, but we're going to stop maybe in Reno, we're going to stop in Placerville. No, we're driving, we're going to meet you along the way. You know, we can't wait for you to get here. We're going out there to get you. They're so anxious to see them. And that's what happens here, because they're going to travel with them, and we'll see here Wednesday. And I'll make one point, and then I'll give it to you. Wednesday night is the payoff. We're going to connect everything that we have been studying these last 3 months. We're going to connect all the dots, and we're going to get the real picture and what I believe is to be the true message from Luke about what's going on here. And it will be provided for us at the end of this chapter. So that's why we wait here. He gets to Rome, and Wednesday night we'll talk about when he gets to Rome, what happens, what he does, what he says. Yes, Ed?
Just connecting the dots in terms of his earlier letters. He's already written a letter to the churches in Rome. And so people there knew who he was in terms of that. And there were Christians who were converted on the day of Pentecost from Rome.
Right.
So I think one of the things that you can get the wrong idea that, well, nothing was there until Paul got there. What's great is you have this whole homecoming. I mean, you had
Right.
people that you didn't know, some that you might have known. It's just very impressive to have him. You've been on this kind of an adventure and
Right.
stuck in prisons for all that time. Having people you know, see their faces, really sweet.
None of this was done in private. The network was very active. And when Paul wrote the book of Romans, when he was back in Corinth years earlier, everyone knew. So they're excited to meet the man who wrote the letter. And that's what happens Wednesday night. Thank you for your good attention. Thank you.